Morning, Karen. How are you?
I am well, and how are you?
Well, I've had my vaccination.
Yes?
First one, yes.
Any after effects?
Not really, no. Temperature might have gone up and down a little bit,
Yep.
but it was underwhelming. There was no drama. I just got a jab in my arm and was chucked out of the room by a nurse.
Well, the lines aren't underwhelming.
No, they're not. So I feel really good, and I feel like I've done the right thing for me, for my family,
Yep.
for my workplace, and for my community. I feel really good about it.
Oh, good.
And can I just say, we had a fantastic rollout last week. We asked people to put in what were the major themes that were affecting their workplace. We got flexible work, mental health issues, enterprise bargaining, workplace safety, employee engagement, retention and collaboration, contractor management, change management, cultural survey, realignment, and ageing workplace, which of course we're going to deal with today. But to everyone who put things in, thank you very much. It is now time to choose the winner who gets the free training. So Karen, put your hand in there. I'll just shake it up for a second.
There's the music.
There's no music. What, Sophie, why is there no music?
I'll probably grab two.
There we go.
Here we go.
Okay, so the winner, I've never been the barrel girl before, so the winner is Joe McMahon from Australian Land. Thank you very much, Joe. We'll be in contact with you shortly. I might bring you down one of our cups too, as you can see. I'm not sure if you can see what that says, but it's probably best you can't. And if you watch more than 10 of us in a year, you get a free cup. So
yes.
Here's cheers to you out there. All right, Joe, we'll be in contact very shortly. How's your week been?
Look, the week's been full. I've been jet setting around the country.
I know you are the jet setter, aren't you?
Yeah.
It used to be me, but I'm part of the ageing workforce.
That's right.
Can I just say I am definitely part, because here is the infographic, and it's got 55 in the middle of Australia, and you might not believe this, but I'm
55
over 55
plus actually.
Yeah.
55 anyway. No, look, it's been a full week working on some really exciting stuff. I've got 4 organisational reviews going on at the moment.
Gosh, your team must be busy.
Yeah, we're busy, but it's really exciting work, really interesting. There's a real appetite for, certainly along with our client base, to really review and consider the future of their business, and to be able to design and think about, how do we future-proof our business. So that's great work. Still got enterprise agreements on the go as well, and a couple of major investigations. So, we're around. So, and we're growing. So I'm going to be putting out very shortly. I'm on the hunt for a really experienced HR person to join our team, to help me with all the work. So
that's good. 3 to 4 days a week.
Yeah.
Which sounds great. All right. Well, look, let's get into it.
Let's go.
That's good. That was the free ad. We don't need to use Seek now or LinkedIn. We've got 3 cases I want to talk to you about today. One of them we're going to turn into a major article, which is the Franco and Deliveroo case. I know not many of you work from a gig-based platform, but it is an emerging process around the world that the classic methods of engagement, which are either employer, or contractor, are really stuck with this platform idea. At the moment, 1/3 of the world's employment goes through platforms. Now that's amazing, isn't it? Not through I'm employing you, but mediated work through a digital platform. In the Western world, the average is somewhere between 9 to 18% of people who currently do work do it through platform base. In some parts of Asia, it's as high as 30 to 40%. And in places like Vietnam, higher again, up around the 45, 50%. So we can't ignore it. And the dichotomy we have in Australia between employee or contractor, the courts are continuing to struggle with. So there are 3 Uber cases, all of which were found they were definitely an independent contractor. There's a case called Gupta we dealt with about 6 months ago, where the full bench of the Fair Work Commission said it's not really an employee, it's not really a contractor, and they made up this 3rd category, which is a person conducting their own business. Anyway, who knows what's going to happen with that. And then there is Fedara and this most recent Deliveroo case, which said, no, these people are definitely employees. Now, whether a person is an employee or a contractor is determined by what's called a multifactorial test today. Does the employee exercise control? Do they work dedicated hours? Are you able to delegate work? There's a whole range of factors. And what happens in these gig cases is, of these 20 or 30 factors, it comes down to one, and what a court or tribunal does, it gets lost in it and goes, that one's enough for me to believe that person's an employee. Now, for you who are out there thinking of utilising a platform to leverage off and have the flexibility that gig workers give you, What does that really mean? Well, it means from the date you start creating the idea through to execution and then making it happen, you have to have an incredibly deliberate process that captures that multifactorial test, because the Australian courts are not going to work away from this dichotomy.
Yeah.
It's no good just giving someone a contract and thinking you've won the day.
Yeah, or pretty much telling them, look, if you've got an ABN, just send us an invoice with an ABN on it. It's a lot more than that. It's like you said, it's multifaceted. And in terms of operationally, how do you demonstrate that these guys are not employees?
Yeah, and remember, this isn't just about employment law. This is about the common law and liability. This is about your insurable liability. It's much more complex than it looks like. So, fascinating case, and Matt's going to help me put together an argument about the need for this third manner of engagement as being recognised. And the Victorian government have also contemplated in their recent survey around gig workers, which they completed only a few months ago. The next case is an illustrative case more than anything. It's Whitfield and Primo Foods. This was a woman who was a production worker, and she talked about knocking someone off their perch. Okay, now not, I think a relatively innocuous comment, but it was seen as threatening. The organisation fired her. They didn't go through procedural fairness, and surprise, surprise, despite their protest, she was reinstated. So really the worst outcome for Primo Foods. But Karen, again, this comes down to this issue that language is contextual. All of us, in whatever culture we come from, have certain cultural phrases which are not necessarily threatening, but they're illustrative of a sense of frustration or irritation. I've had this guy up to here. Doesn't mean I'm about to kill him. It needs to be knocked off their perch. They're a bit too proud of themselves. Well, it's gossip. It's not good behaviour. It's certainly misconduct. But it's not, I'm going to knock that person off the perch. And it feeds into this last issue that you and I constantly deal with, which is misconduct through the use of language, which is offensive and rude language. If you use language, if your leaders continue to use language, which is swear words, insulting words, make rude jokes, doctrine of condemnation applies, of course, and if someone else uses that, who's an employee, and they will because they're following your lead as a leader, then you can't terminate them. But the other issue is, how do you determine the intent? So if I tell you to go and get effed, but I just say, I'll get effed. Well, I can't sack you for saying that because that's just me making a light sort of...
Yeah.
How do I pick the intent? Imagine doing an investigation.
Well, I do. Well, these are the kind of things. It's really hard when I'm investigating, conducting these investigations in terms of, well, how did you interpret that, or what did you mean by that? And the way that you've just said, like, it could be interpreted 7 different ways, So which one's right? And they could all be right because each person's view is a bit different, right? So,
and that, when we look at an investigation, so the test, if you're about to terminate someone for being threatening, that's quite a threat towards somebody is an assault in criminal law, okay? So it's serious. So under Briginshaw, the quality of the evidence you have to meet the balance of probabilities test, the finding, is very, very high. So how does Karen work out when everybody tells everyone to get effed, that when this person said it, they meant it and it was meant to be a threat by the way their eyes looked, by the manner in which they spoke? So I guess this case doesn't say much, but it really brings home this issue of what is good language, what is good behaviour in a workplace.
Yes, and certainly what type of behaviour and language do you normalise, whether you're consciously aware of that or not. It's an important matter.
And so for this case, although it's not quite on the subject that we've moved to, but it's the issue that we deal with on every day.
Yeah.
I also want you to be a little bit liberal in understanding that people say and do things when they're frustrated and tired. They do. And
I do.
Well,
all the time.
You've only just recently done it.
Yeah.
But we've got to understand where this comes from. We're meant to be generous to the people in our workplace. If someone's expressing frustration, that's what they're doing. Listen to what they're saying. Don't punish them for a poor use of words, particularly where there can never be a proper perception of threat that's involved. The last case is one that Nina's prepared for us. By the way, Ness did some work on that, so thank you, Ness. Landmark Roofing and Safe Work Australia, which is a New South Wales case where a supervisor failed to follow a workplace direction, and as a result of which a worker fell through the roof and died. Landmark made what can only be described as a poorly conceived decision to litigate the matter on the basis that the supervisor was an officer. Well, I think all of us know they're not, and certainly that's what the court found. They're definitely not an officer. But the really interesting part is the overall misconception, and this is, again, an illustrative. This is not the major part of this case. When can you sever vicarious liability? When can a company say, well, the supervisor did that, it was so completely contrary to what his obligations were, we cannot be liable for it? And the answer is, if you have a system in place which is demonstrably a good system, which has integrity, and you can prove that people knew these things were wrong and they knew they weren't to do it. But in Landmark, the swims wasn't even filled out correctly. There's a whole lot of things that weren't done correctly, but there was no system that would have captured that failure. So Landmark were always going to be liable. Yeah. What I want you to, and in our safety part of your practice, one of the things we keep drawing people back to is saying, well, does the system have integrity? Because if it does, and somebody does something wrong, you as a business will not be liable for it. Yep. But also the likelihood of something going wrong is dramatically reduced because you do. And our obligation every day is not to harm people.
Yeah, look, and I've seen across organisations, Andrew, and you'd know this too, that safety often is a single point sensitive.
Yep.
Often coming down to a person.
Yep.
It just doesn't work, and it's just so risky.
Let's swing very quickly. Can you introduce your infographic?
My infographic.
Your infographic.
Yeah.
And just talk basically about some of the key statistics around the ageing workforce. What are the risks that gives rise to? And then we'll both work together on, well, how do we manage that? And next week, Karen and I are going to put together an infographic which talks about how to implement the strategy of managing aged workforce. Remember, I'm old, so I've already started this process. But what are the steps? What are the key things you must consider in developing a strategy around managing an ageing workforce? Karen, over to you.
Yeah, sure. So if you can load that up. Oh, here we go. Today's infographic. Now, there is a number, okay?
It's a frightening number. Frightening number.
55. So in terms of defining an ageing workforce in Australia.
That's 55 people are in an ageing workforce in Australia.
55, age 55 plus. Now, it used to be, because it's very loosely defined actually, it used to be an older worker is 40 plus. So, I'm not far off that myself. No, exactly. So look, what I've got here for you today is really just a couple of points to share, some rough statistics in terms of, to illustrate that, look, the ageing workforce is something that we can't shy away from. We've got to recognise that there are risks associated with having a workforce whose demographic is, moving towards the later, the senior years, the later end. I don't know how. Yeah, senior years. I don't know. I know. But I think about my wording.
Workforce and senior years.
Yes.
Great, thanks.
So look, the couple of organisational risks that arise from that. One is around talent retention, but also capability transfer, succession planning. The other part of it is around in terms of job adaptability. So in terms of someone who is physically fit and in terms of really, really agile, in terms of working in a really dynamic, fast-paced environment, or in a role that's really, let's say, physically strenuous, how does that need to change over time for someone who may not be fit to do that anymore? So it raises the issue around inherent requirements in terms of fitness for work as well. Is it, rather than look at an aging workforce and say, well, look, there's kind of can't do the job anymore, and that's kind of just how do we figure out a way to move these people on? It's actually, there's an awful lot of opportunity that lives within the workforce in this group, but it does require planning and really thoughtful design. And it's really a part of that, and I want to run over to the strategy and the opportunity part of it, requires you to do a couple of things which we'll talk about next week around identifying where those risks actually sit and profiling your workforce as well, and understanding how those needs are different to different pockets of your workforce. So without going to the detail of it all there, but I wanted to just give you a snapshot because the issue very much is real, Andrew. By the time 2030, 31, quarter of our workforce will be people over the age of 55.
So next week we are going to, in this session, drill down on the actual strategy. We'll spend time together. And what I thought I'd do in the next 5 minutes is talk to you a little bit about what the law is that sits behind it, because as you've identified, the primary one is inherent requirements. So we're not going to do too much strategy this week. No. We're just going to talk about the law that sits behind it. Yeah. The issue for us is very simple. Is someone fit to do the job they're meant to do? Now, the biggest problem we have, and I know many of you have heard me say this before, is actually the job descriptions don't reflect at all what people do in the workplace. They're 2007, or jobs have morphed into others. Now, we know because of the flexibility that we now enjoy in workplaces because of COVID, a lot of things have changed, but what hasn't adapted is how people's capability is being measured to undertake the work they're meant to do.
Yeah.
That's a piece of work which is actually urgent, because you can't manage someone unless you say this is what they do. And what you say they do is their inherent requirements. So if I say Karen is the supervisor of something, but Karen also does some ancillary, moves chairs around the lunch table when we have a board meeting, and Karen can't move the chairs around because she hurts her back, well, her job is a supervisor. And that's Bogan Button's case, which was a supervisor who once a fortnight or once every now and again had to lift a couple of 25-kilogram barrels of beer, and he couldn't do it because of the injury. He'd had it for 2 years. At that stage, Bogues had been taken over, and the business that sat behind it looked at its workers' comp profile. They saw Button had been there for 2 years. They realised they could terminate his employment. He could do his job as a supervisor fine. He just needed help from 2 young boys to lift the barrels every now and again. There was no loss in productivity in what he did at all. And they terminated him because they said he wasn't fit for the inherent requirement of the job. Now, remember, in discrimination law, inherent requirement has another thing that sits at the end of it, which is called reasonable adjustments. And he'd done a reasonable adjustment, no impact upon the productivity or profitability of the organisation. And he could do this. But in any event, the Fair Work Commission said, his job's a supervisor. It's the substantial job that is the inherent requirements, not every single part of it. So I think that's something we need to understand, because too quickly we start trimming the edges around older people and say, look, he can't do that. But maybe that's not his job. The second thing to remember about job descriptions is if they're not right, you end up in this terrible position where you end up in a dispute and nobody can actually define with any accuracy what is the agreed job description, which is in Mondelez and Zuribus, where a 63-year-old confectioner, clearly not fit for work, okay, done both shoulders, hips, and the court was trying to go through this because they terminated this guy. And again, funnily enough, this was when Mondelez took over the business, looked at the work profile and started taking out a whole lot of people who they saw as sacred cows, okay? This was a guy, and just imagine the skill, 35 years, a confectioner around quality and things, the things this person could have done. They spent thousands and thousands of dollars losing this litigation, so it was done. But when it came to the court, the judge said, look, I don't, if I listen to what Mr. Zuribus says, he does this. If I listen to the HR manager, they show me this job description. The operations manager says it's different. Everyone says it's different. So I can't determine what would be a reasonable adjustment. I know in my heart this man's definitely not able to do the job, but I can't exercise the test under the legislation. So whenever we're dealing with an ageing workforce and we're saying, look, they can't do the job, well, let's go back to basics. Let's look at what is capability and how is that defined and what is the job a person is doing. I want to focus also on what Karen says, which is all organisations, digital or otherwise, have a retained knowledge, and that knowledge is not found in any bit of paper. And while we're so quick to flush away age and so quick to introduce youth, we must remember that what holds, the glue that holds an organisation is retained knowledge. So getting rid of people quickly is a really big mistake. Working out how to keep that and motivate people who are older and introduce new people to get that retained knowledge is a real thing. But don't forget our safety obligation to do everything reasonably practical to monitor someone's health. I can't let someone hurt themselves. And the test is not, when I pick up this table, does it injure me? The test is, if I pick up this table and I keep picking up this table, is there a likelihood I will be injured? That's the safety test, not did it injure me the first time I did it? No, it's whether in the course of my employment, if I keep doing these things, will I? And that triggers your obligation to intervene. That is, I see Karen limping because she's nearly in the old age bracket. She's nearly at 40. I see her limping and I go, sorry, Karen, I just like to get that in because you dug it into me. At the moment I see her limping, I've seen a hazard, okay? And this could be a psychological hazard if I see Karen unhappy, psychological hazard. I still have to intervene. I have to determine what is the level of risk. Remember what reasonable practicability means? Hazard, risk. What is the control? The control has to be ascertaining. First control is I can only stop it, eliminate the risk by telling us stop. That's all I can do until I do understand what is the level of risk. so that I can introduce controls around the nature in which the person does the work. So this gives us our monitoring obligation that triggers how we behave afterwards. So when we look at aged workforce, we do it holistically. We say, we've got a group of people who are moving after 55, and we know that they will acquire health-related issues over that time. It doesn't mean we go out and do health assessments for every single person, but we're very deliberate about what we do with that group. And we say to them, there will come a time when you won't be able to work. We're going to talk to you and show you, given your superannuation, given those things, given your ownership of houses, we'll bring a person along to show you what entitlements you'll get from the government when they kick in, what you can actually do with your money. And we're happy to project through what you're earning now so that you can see it. And because we've been through COVID, we're happy to be very flexible and about how you work going forward in the future. So we get the best for our business and the best for you, a mutual benefit. It has to be genuine, because we've known now we can create a flexible work environment where we never thought we could before. We know actually that's highly productive if we do it well through consultation. And remember, under the award, any discussion of this is a major change and therefore requires deep consultation and clarity before you start. Doesn't mean it can't be done. In fact, it's a great start. So next week we'll talk more in detail between us and use a strategy document with a risk analysis to help you do that. But that's the stuff that we wanted to talk about today. And thanks to Kurt for raising this issue so that we could have a discussion on it. Let's go on to the problem. And I'm gonna see FCW Relay Cup. Sorry, just one last advertisement for the cup. Simon is 67. He's worked at Goatee's Cheese for 37 years. Simon has no clear job description. He has just been moved as the business needs him from time to time. He's currently on the packer line. Simon has 2 long-standing shoulder injuries and has had surgery on both, as well as hip and back problems. Objectively, he can do the job, but if he does, it is probable the load of work will cause further soft tissue injury to his shoulders, back and hip. Goatee's has just commissioned new flexo packers on all lines. Simon now has to sort poor labelling, lift offending boxes off the line, but no longer rotates through other quality functions he used to do. Others have absorbed these jobs. Let's go on. This is a 2-page one. Sophie's going to tell me that. See that little cursor? She's telling me. The company considered making him redundant, but the enterprise agreement provides for 2 weeks of severance pay for every year worked. Simon has been helped by a young operator, Jean, to move heavy boxes when they come through and need removal. They weigh 30 kilograms. That happens around twice a week. It causes no loss of production. An independent medical review finds he is not fit to undertake the job, and there are no reasonable adjustments, citing the 30-kilogram lift he can't do. The objective evidence is undertaking any of the packing line work poses a significant risk of injury. All right, poll time. There we are, there's the poll, that was very good. So we're going to give you a couple of minutes to have a go. That's a big problem. Your time starts now. You want some? Here's cheers. See, it's Coffee Solutions found on the other side. Yeah, it's good, isn't it?
It's a very clean coffee.
Yes, it's actually water.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the 2 cups of coffee we had preparing have almost killed us.
I want a milk-free, sugar-free, decaffeinated. Yeah.
Just water.
Yeah, that's it. There you go. Water.
As you can tell, before we start this, Karen and I have a lot of coffee. So.
Yep.
How are we going, Karen? Your eyes are better than mine because I'm over 55.
Oh, but I'm not trailing too far behind you there, Andrew. 1:49 seconds. Another 10 seconds to go. All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Let's have a look at
how we those results for me.
Yep. I'm just doing it right now.
All right. So the first question is it a breach of safety law to require Simon to continue his job? Interesting question. And it's interesting because we don't actually know what his job is. So I thought we just raised that squarely at the beginning. But I think all of us know in our heart that if working on the packer line and not being rotated as he was previously is going to create a risk, then it's clearly a breach of the safety obligations, A, to provide a safe place of work, but a complete failure to monitor his health.
Yeah.
And the medical thing is, this happens all the time. We get IMEs, or independent medicals, who actually don't get the law. And so they go, oh no, that lifting 30 kilograms, it's not reasonable. Well, the answer is it's reasonable to require him not to do it because that's not his job. You know, there's things they could have done to make adjustments here. So the medical report was a bit of a furphy in a way, because too often when Kim does this work, we've received, where unions have been involved, for instance, absolutely terrible reports which are completely unhelpful to the individual and the organisation. So can I say asking the right questions is a key issue here, and also explaining, you know, tell us what the adjustments that can be made, but don't be telling us what are reasonable adjustments, because actually what's reasonable is a question of law. It's not a question for a doctor to answer. It is just how could you make an adjustment. So the fact that there's yeses and nos here, I think, is right, because the facts are a bit difficult to actually gauge. Was Simon's role redundant? Good question, isn't it? Well, the difficulty is,
what's the role?
What is the role? But the real difficulty is, which comes into the third question, is I think they all agree it was, because the role he did before has been absorbed by other people and could have been completely absorbed. And therefore, the only reason he wasn't made redundant is he was a very expensive employee. So I think on the face of it, there is a good argument he would be made redundant, but I agree with what people say there, is it's not clear as to whether he's redundant or not. But what is absolutely clear is they've treated him differently as a result of him having an entitlement to redundancy. Okay. So there's a good arguable case for that, which brings us to the third question, is could terminating his employment for inherent requirements for be adverse action discrimination when there was alternative work and quality, reasonable adjustments could have been made, or the role was redundant. And I'm telling you, this is a lay down misere. And you could really bring any one of those causes of action with a fair amount of success. And unfortunately, this is where we often find ourselves. So for me, and I know it's happened to you in the last few months, we've talked about, well, what do I do with the role? It's sort of redundant. In fact, we don't, if we were actually going to structure the business the way it should be, we don't need this role. Sometimes that's a very senior role, you know, which is one we've discussed recently. But for me, more than often, it's when we introduce capital into a line and I no longer need the person to do the high volume work that was being required of them. I could use anybody to do the small bits of work they're doing, and the rest of it could be absorbed, which is the case here. And the first thing that we talk about is say, so what does that cost? And then people will say, well, we've got problems with them around performance. Well, are we really going to manage performance of someone who's a 20-year lifer in your business and their last experience of you is punishing them on the way out? Or are we going to say, when they've never really been fit for work for the last 5 years, I will do it on that basis? When they actually have a whole lot of value they could have created, and a proper discussion with them would have allowed them. So in Mondelez and Zurabus, he was very honest. He said he only wanted to work a year and a half more and then he wanted to go in retirement. So if they had had a discussion around retirement with him, he might have only worked 3 or 4 days. They could have had a whole different strategy towards retirement. So this problem that I created was really to show you, just as you've answered, there are no pure answers in these cases where there's no good job description, where people are treated differently, where people are aging, where they're frail, but they've given your life to the organisation. And all I'd urge you to is invest in a bit of sympathy, think carefully about not just the money outcome for you, but what's the story you're telling in a business? Now, I missed something. Somebody made a comment.
Oh, Jeanette was saying bye.
Oh, sorry, Jeanette. Bye. So look, that's it for today. We're going to do the ageing strategy next week, and we'll probably spend a bit more time than we did on the breakdown of what the law is.
Yep.
There's an interesting case that came through this morning, which will make its way through to you next week as well. And we'll have another problem. But thank you very much for today. And congratulations to, was it Joe who won?
Joe,
yeah,
yes.
Congratulations, Joe. We'll be in contact and you can pick your training.
Yes.
We're down to Colac.
Well, it might be you, it might be me. We don't know.
Could be you. It could be you. I think Joe likes you more than me. So I think it's you.
Pick him.
Okay, everybody. See you later. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.